Welcome back to the Cloud Native Platforms track here at Spring One. I'm Whitney Lee. I'm your MC for the second half of the Cloud Native Platforms track today. I'm so glad you're here. There's so much to learn. Next, Alex Barbado and Hannah Hunt are here to present their talk, Treating Security Like a Product. In it, they will explain how security can be integrated throughout the entire software development lifecycle to create stronger security outcomes and ultimately speed up time to delivery. Take it away, Hannah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Spring One talk about treating security like a product. My name is Hannah Hunt. I'm the Chief of Product at the Army Software Factory.
I'm Alex Barbado. I'm a Solutions Engineer at VMware.
Before we get started, just wanted to give a quick disclaimer. I'm a federal employee, so any reference to products or services doesn't imply any official endorsement by the Department of Defense or the Department of the Army.
Sweet. The same goes for me, but I'm not a federal employee, so let's go.
All right, so here's a little bit about Alex and I. I am, like I mentioned, the Chief of Product at the Army Software Factory, which is focused on upskilling soldiers to be able to build and deliver software capabilities for other soldiers. I've had a very long and very different career. I was the Chief of Staff at the Air Force's Kessel Run, which has spoken at Spring One a couple times before coming here to the Software Factory and building software by soldiers for soldiers.
Awesome. And I'm a Solutions Engineer at VMware now, but I've had the pleasure of working with Hannah and the rest of the folks at the Software Factory for the past basically year now, which kind of segues us perfectly into how Hannah and I got to know each other, a satire. We started out, we like to set the stage of we got to know each other over us coming together in a room as her being the Chief of Product and me playing a cybersecurity role within the organization, and her trying to help get an application to prod, and me effectively dumping a pile of paperwork on her desk to then have her give me this meme face. It's not exactly how it happened, but that's my memory, Hannah.
Yeah, and we were talking about how to implement security checklists and requirements for our software application, and I just felt it was terribly redundant and not actually focusing on cybersecurity. So yeah, that face is very accurate. But if we want to talk about real life, how we both got here, both Alex and I mentioned I was an Air Force civilian, Alex is an Air Force veteran, and we both came from different roles. I was mostly focused on business and acquisitions and manpower and hiring before transitioning into this Chief of Product role. But and Alex was a linguist turned cybersecurity professional. That's a fun fact about Alex. He speaks about 6 languages. And we both came together around the common outcome of being able to deliver, get an application known as MySquad into production. So both of us have a very strong mission background, but we started to deliver mission outcomes together, and we wanted to continue to do that in a secure manner. So we'll be talking through today how we did that and how we transitioned. So we learned a lot along the way. We learned that it's really difficult to get an application into production in the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army. We also learned a lot of things around cybersecurity and how to do them well and also not so well. What we found was, oh, go ahead.
Nope. Primarily, we learned that cybersecurity and compliance aren't easy, and it wasn't easy for us to get ourselves through. So that was one of our biggest takeaways that I think Hannah's going to talk a little more in detail about.
Yes. So before we go into what we did and how we got through some of the cybersecurity hurdles, it's important to highlight what the federal government uses to assess risk in a cybersecurity posture, and it's known as the Risk Management Framework. It was originally created for the Department of Defense and then eventually transitioned to a government-wide framework adopted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And it's basically a very prescriptive process of which to integrate both security, privacy, cybersecurity, risk management into a life cycle of software development. So there's 7 steps within the risk management framework. You can read the wonderful documentation if that's something that interests you, but it's basically preparing to understand what the risks and impacts could be categorizing them into clear sets of controls and selecting those controls of which you're going to assess yourself against and others, implementing said controls, security controls, assessing if you did those controls correctly, getting an authorization or an authority to operate, saying, yes, I met all the standards and I will be able to use my system in production, and then continuous monitoring that is done typically on a yearly basis, which again, not great timing.
Exactly. And it's a little more complicated than that, because it hasn't always been RMF. I still consider myself a young man at heart, so I haven't been here for this whole journey. But in talking with some of my more senior friends that helped enlighten me here, the processes within the DoD and the federal government have gotten gradually more prescriptive as they've gone, which has been a result of compliance and cybersecurity folks wanting to do the right thing and wanting more and more ideas of specific ways to secure their systems. But that's also had the adverse effect of ballooning the requirements and the things people have to do.
And what we've seen now is that over the years, the government has often over-rotated on the mechanism of compliance, of documentation, of understood controls, to the detriment of real cybersecurity standards. So in federal government cybersecurity teams, you often see that there are folks that have more knowledge on on-premise hardware versus cloud-based solutions. Cloud is relatively new to the government. They're typically behind the times. There also, as I mentioned, a reliance on documentation versus actual coding ability to be able to actually build securely. And there's not a proactivity against using new technological trends. A great example is the way that controls are defined is called in a STIG document. The Kubernetes STIG just came out like 2 months ago. So we're already behind the curve. Kubernetes has been existing now for 5 years. And I think the biggest pain we see as mission owners is that cybersecurity teams are not connected to mission outcomes and instead are seen as a barrier to entry and then not somebody that you can bring along on the drive. But it's really not their fault. It's a systemic problem across the federal government in which organizations are increasingly risk averse and also unwilling to articulate their risk tolerance. So it's hard to tell what they're even willing to accept or not accept. There's also a decentralization of risk. Every organization has an authorizing official that defines what that risk profile is going to be, and it can be very different than another authorizing official. So there's no set standard, even though they're supposed to be. So there are also major security struggles and compliance struggles in industry. Alex, as my industry partner, can definitely speak to those.
Yeah, the struggles of the government are not all that different than that we see in both small organizations and large. So starting with small, we typically hear that small organizations are fighting to survive, or tied in with that, have a belief that cybersecurity risk is not insurmountable or overly large based on their risk profile. Also, they have a problem of lacking expertise to actually effectively harden and secure their various components. The data also supports this, in that right now, the average breach costs around $4 million worldwide, $9 million if you just look at the United States. Over a quarter of cyber attacks are targeting small businesses right now due to the potential gain just from going after potentially weaker targets. And also there's a large swath of unfilled cybersecurity positions that are expected to remain unfilled well into 2022. And the reality is enterprise doesn't fare any better. 12%, we've seen a 12% increase in the past few years in ransomware attacks on enterprises. And if there is a mega breach of above 50 million records, that can result in almost $400 million cost for a business. And guess what? They don't have any easier of a time filling those cybersecurity roles than the small business does. The shortage is from the government to small business to enterprise. It's totally across the spectrum.
And I think we see this so acutely within the federal space, the underfilled cybersecurity positions being classified as IT specialists versus actual cybersecurity professionals, where there's a desperate need for people who have an understanding of complex, secure systems and cloud native solutions. And the government is really behind the curve in being able to hire those people competitively, even with authorities like direct hire authority. Where I think a lot of us are hoping that this new executive order that came out about cybersecurity will really kickstart that model within the government. But it's been a long time coming that this is needed to take precedent.
True, and that extends to private sector just as much. But some in the private sector may say, well, can I insure for this? Like, if I just take out a nice policy, can I, cover this risk differently? Maybe in the short term is the answer. But certainly if we look at the data, cost of insurance for ransomware attacks and other various cyber incidents is going up and will probably only continue to do so until we see the bottom line for insurance companies changing as well. So how do we change this?
Yeah, how do we change it, Alex? By treating security like a product. We just talked about a lot of the issues and pains that we're facing, but we think there's a mechanism to reduce that risk and that toil by treating security just like any other product team that has user outcomes and is focused on cybersecurity as an offering that teams can leverage to improve their cybersecurity posture. Instead of it being that kick over the wall model, we're actually working together and providing outcomes over outputs.
Honestly, we could probably wrap the talk there, but let's keep going. The question is, how do you treat security like a product? The answer is consistent view into things that matter, which is not all that different than any other product. But let's use the typical iceberg metaphor that most folks are familiar with, and that you see a small tip of risk sticking out from the water, but you don't necessarily know about the large underbody that you can't see of risk that's coming towards you. The reality is that most icebergs don't look like that because they would fall over to the side if they were that shape. So there's not typically that huge underbelly, but there is stuff underneath that is of concern. It's similar when we think about risk and being able to see the things that we need to worry about so that way we don't accidentally run our quote unquote business into the iceberg. But it's not trivial. It's quite difficult to actually figure out risk profiles. Many businesses are focused on things like story velocity, usage, revenue, profit margins, but you'll rarely see a risk dashboard tied right alongside these. And that has huge ramifications in areas like the federal government, where you can have your system shut down at a moment's notice if it's seen to be out of compliance or introducing unnecessary or extreme risk to the broader environment. Like we said, it's not easy. But we think that we solve this problem by focusing on what has been dubbed controllable input metrics. This is coming from Colin Breyer's book from out of Amazon, where they focus on what are the controllable input metrics that teams can focus on to deliver towards those output metrics that they want. I can't make money come into our bank account, but I can build a product that will want to be bought. I can influence the shape of that product. It's the same concept here for security. All right, hold on to your britches. So we think that the controllable input for security is control insights. Now, it's probably a good thing that you only see my face and not Hannah's right now, because she looks exactly like this person on the screen. Hear us out, hear us out. We have a reason here.
The federal government has certain, as you can see from this very painful Excel spreadsheet, this is how the government measures risks currently. And it is clear and highly documented that results in hundreds of pieces of documentation that scales terribly and has resulted in a throw it over the fence mentality where cybersecurity professionals are incentivized to just state that everything's over risky and make it harder to get applications into production. And then it incentivizes product teams to just go around their cybersecurity people because they want to get their applications to users. And it's just a vicious cycle of being unable to actually meet the intent of risk management framework and still have a secure system. So there's also plenty of goodness here. One, you actually know what controls exist, which is very difficult to measure, and that provides this basis of measurement. And it can be automatable with some effort So there is goodness, but oftentimes it's overwhelmed by the trivialness of the compliance process of which just going through reams and reams of documentation. So what we want to know, what we think about is like, how does this look at the very tactical level? And with small organizations, we often see that it's an all hands on deck model. And so we're looking at things like threat modeling, establishing relevant controls, paths to measure success, defaulting to automation, and then iterating and taking feedback. There's not a lot of agility that we see within the federal government, but doesn't this look like risk management framework? Like it hits specific threats, but it meets all the intents that risk management framework is meant to do, just in a very kind of like robust fashion.
Yeah, let's start looking at some of those individual chunks because as you said, Hannah, it's all about how do we chop this up to be actionable for teams. Starting with threat modeling, the first step and arguably the most important. We can apply security best practices as we all should, but sometimes that can be massively overwhelming because there is typically a definition of secure versus insecure. But you want to target your efforts to the things that matter most first, right? So it's important that we understand where are the potential threat vectors and making sure that we focus on those high risk areas first, above and beyond just general security best practices. An example being if we take in credit card information for our payments app, that's probably a high risk area. Similarly, if we run our application right next to all of our health information, we might want to make sure that we don't have any privilege escalation risk. So.
And like I mentioned, in establishing relevant controls, there's tons of frameworks that you can leverage. And really, it's just to incentivize behavior for cybersecurity personnel to set controllable input metrics that meet both business outcomes as well as application and team outcomes while still doing and maintaining a cybersecurity posture. There are tons of relevant controls. The government uses the NIST 800-53. There's OWASP, there's CIS benchmarks. There's a bunch of different flavors, but you can find the ones that work right for you. We're not endorsing any or all of them. The government has to use NIST, so I guess I could say I have to endorse NIST. But there's things that work best for you.
Next, we need to understand and have measures for success. One of the core concepts that we believe in here is that we shouldn't be separating business and security concerns as if they aren't inextricably linked. The way you do that is totally up to your business. You can do things like war games where you simulate your business at load and potentially have a pen test going on at the same time. I mean, you pick your flavor that works for you here. Roadmaps and OKRs, as we'll talk about later, is the preference that we landed on in our organization. But whatever works for you, you should try, so long as you are actually in Hannah's shoes, able to look and see, hey, if I look at some form of apples to apples comparison from my risk to my business outcomes. Awesome. And if this looks like a big slide that says a lot of things, that's the intent. The idea being that there's a lot going on in governance, risk, and compliance. So this diagram out of Amazon as well shows just like the numerous layers that go into an effective GRC like system. And we say you have to default to automation, be that just like simple reminders or a good product or project management tool, or actual like automated tests and scans. It's not so important that the tool, what's important is the behavior, and this being where you go first before you manually document that something is true or was true at the time you wrote it.
And I think the most important thing here is that taking feedback and iterating. It's okay to have negative feedback or positive feedback. Oftentimes we see that developers are super confused when they see controls not written for them, but written for security personnel. And so there needs to be a level of give and take to make sure that security controls are understood and feasible for an application team to implement. So it's all about speaking to the right audience and then improving upon your posture. So how does this manifest in large organizations, big enterprise organizations like the federal government? What we've seen that works best is that we have product teams that can focus on certain cybersecurity aspects. So if you've seen General Stanley McChrystal's book about Team of Teams, there's a value in the fact of moving away from a command or top-down structure to a more teams of teams approach, where cybersecurity teams are working together along with infrastructure, platform, and user-facing application teams to meet the intents and working as this balanced team of services that provide the ultimate outcome of getting applications into production. As your organization expands, you're also going to see pen testers, detection alerting, security assessments, red blue teams. There's a bunch of specialized teams that can emerge as your risk profile expands. But it's not to say that we are telling you what the special sauce is. Everything is based and tailored on what your particular organization's needs are. So we often, we've talked now about the problem, we've talked about potential solutions, but we haven't really talked about how this is manifested for us within the Army Software Factory.
Exactly. So one of the core things that came about for us was in embracing that team of teams model, we recognized that we needed a role that helped bridge that gap between the compliance needs that are valid and true to the development and product team needs that want to build secure things. So we introduced a role called the Application Security Validation Engineer. Credit to Robert Van Voorhees, Steve White, Paul Puckett. Many people were involved in the creation and the ideation of this role, but the idea being that they are code-first individuals that are able to help application teams meet the intent of compliance and security controls and be able to bridge that gap effectively. And one of the core things that we looked for out of this ASVE that they may not have got out of me, but hopefully somebody else will come and do it, is that we really want to focus on soft skills in this role. It is one thing to be able to code, but we recognize that in this role, there needs to be a strong level of empathy and soft skills to be able to work between these teams that have very important needs, and in some cases, like very hard lines in the sand, but be able to effectively bring in collaboration and help teams move towards outcomes that may not come natural for them.
So what we see within the federal government currently is that organizations are traditionally aligned between security and compliance teams versus the actual product teams, platform teams, and the actual business outcomes of meeting whatever user outcome there is. And so there's this real break and divide that provides bad practices and misaligned incentives, because there's this throw this over the fence mentality, or that security is the stop at the door versus something that's continually iterated upon. So in our role, in our respect, this is manifested for us with the MySquad application that we're kind of bringing back, is that we had a collective team that was focused on all having the shared outcome of meeting, getting MySquad into production. And so instead of just working collectively, there's no strong power dynamics, we're just integrated on this shared outcome towards shared objectives and key results and shared ownership.
Yeah, I want to double click on that quickly, Hannah, to say every single team is working off of their individual roadmaps, but they're integrated and working towards a joint OKR. So the idea being that these teams are free flowing, and we by no means hold the strong opinion that this will be the formation forever or even is in 5 minutes, but it's the one that our organization has taken for now. And we hope that it will lead to the results in delivering towards the OKRs that we've set for ourselves.
So our real rallying point here is that you can treat security like a product, because it garners buy-in from the user, which is the application team, into focusing on security outcomes and making security more tangible and usable.
And our approach happens to be one where we're leveraging shared outcomes with tactical specialists in our ASVEs to help in implementation and scaling, while also using OKRs and roadmaps to bring teams together, including our cybersecurity and our product teams all in one towards joint outcomes. Yours may be different.
So we just want to thank you all very much for listening to us talk about cybersecurity for the last 30 minutes. It really gets Alex and I pretty hyped up. Please join us at the Q&A session after this. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone that helped us get here.
Wow. Thanks, y'all. I definitely have a better understanding of how treating security as a product improves the delivery and reliability of software applications. If you have any questions for Hannah and Alex, please click the Slack link in the Now Playing tile on this webpage. And then from the Slack channel, you can find a Zoom link to this presentation's Q&A session. And now we come upon a break. Refill your drink, take a bio break, and tell your pet hamster about the key takeaways of the day so far. Sure, Buttercup is within hearing distance of the presentations themselves, but as we all know, pets only understand their owners when they talk in a high-pitched baby voice. I'll see you back here at 4:05 Eastern for the next stellar presentation.